All right, what's going on, everybody? And in today's video, we're going to be using Firebase and Cloud FireStore to send our modal data from our browser to FireStore. And then once FireStore receives that data, we're going to display the data here on this page in real time. Okay, so we're going to be sending two types of data here, a phone number and an email. So what's going to happen is once we add our info in here, it's going to send to FireStore. And once FireStore receives it, it'll display here on this page. So a few things I want to go ahead and get into before we start this project is that I did create this modal here in a separate project on my channel, so we're not going to be going over the HTML and CSS for this. I'm going to copy and paste that in, but if you do want to learn about that, I will go ahead and leave the link down below in the description to that video. Otherwise, I'll leave the link to the GitHub repo so you can start and follow along with me with this completed modal right here. Okay, so if you never heard of Firebase, let me go ahead and touch upon this real quick. It is a product by Google, and I'll leave the link down below in the description for this as well. We'll be coming back here to set our project up once we get into that portion. But Firebase has a ton of products. We're going to be utilizing Cloud FireStore here, but they also have authentication, hosting, cloud storage, real-time database, just so much stuff that we will actually be getting into here on the channel. So if you guys are looking forward to learning Firebase, go ahead and subscribe, and we'll be doing a lot more videos with I think authentication coming up soon, and also hosting. Okay, so heading back into our modal here, let me go ahead and show you how this works. So let me go ahead and add a fake number in here. So we did add a little bit of validation, which I will show you. And if I hit add your info, it'll say please enter a valid number. So let's do a real one here, or not a real one, but actually a number. And if I hit add info now, you'll see that'll go away. And let's add a real email in here as well. So we did have a validation of both the phone number and the email. So once I hit add info, that'll go away, and you can see here the data populated in real time. We didn't do any refreshing. This is all part of the FireStore real-time capability, and I will show you how to implement this as well. And I did also add the ability to delete this item, so if I click on delete here, it'll be removed. And yeah, that's what we're going to be building. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so to begin, what I want to go ahead and do is go through the file structure for this project. Then we need to head over to Firebase and create and set up that project, then import it over into our files here in VS Code. Okay, so to begin here, let's kind of go over the two HTML files that we're going to be using for this project. So we have our main.html, which is going to be the actual modal we created in a previous video here on my channel. Now, I'm not going to go through this like I mentioned in the video earlier, but I will go over a few things that I did change from the previous video, and that would be these three lines of code down here. So what we have is a P class with a title or text of please enter a valid number. This is going to be our validation code, so it has a class of phone number error, and display none, so that initially this will not be shown on the page when the page is loaded. We'll use JavaScript to dynamically remove and show it if there is a validation error. And then we have this other input we added for an email, which is really, something simple. And then same thing down here is a validation for the email as well. Now, coming down here to our script tag, we did add an additional JavaScript file, which is going to be firebase.js, which will hold our Firebase configuration for this project. And besides that, everything else is the same in the video we did earlier on the channel. So if you want to go ahead and replicate that, following along in the video, I'll go ahead and leave the link down below in the description. Otherwise, just download the repo and you should have all this already set up for you. Now, moving over here, we have our form data.html, which is going to be this page right here, which will house all of our data from Firebase. Now, this is a pretty simple setup. We have a div with a form with a class of form submissions, which is pretty much a wrap, and then we have an h2 with our title, and then we also have a form container. And then we have our form data, which is going to house all the data for this project. You can see by default, we have this div of the class of form titles, which is this right here. So this is a really simple setup. And then we also have our firebase.js script down here, as well as another script tag for form data.js, because we're going to be splitting the code up for the two HTML files. Okay. And like I said, or maybe I didn't mention this before, so this class right here, form data, is where we're going to dynamically use JavaScript and Firebase to add our data into this div right here. And let's head over to our style sheet really quick and kind of show you what I added. So let's see here. So here's all the classes for the form, which is, pretty simple code here. Just a lot of divs, or not divs, a lot of display flex, centering things, some background colors. So not going to go through all this, but once again, like I said, if you download the repo, you'll have all this and you can kind of go over. This is not going to be an HTML and CSS video. We're going to be mainly focusing on JavaScript and Firebase. So with that being said, that is the basic structure for our files here. And I guess I should go through what we have over here on our JS side. We have our app.js, which is going to be simply all the code we added from our previous video for the modal animation and the modal appearing and disappearing. Our Firebase.javascript file will house our Firebase configuration, which we will use on both files. And then we have our formData.js, which is going to be all the JavaScript specifically for obtaining the data from Firebase and implementing it into our formData.html. So with that being said, that is everything I wanted to go ahead and cover here. So let's head over to Firebase and get started with creating our project. All right, so to create our project here with Firebase, we need to head over to firebase.google.com. Now, you need to have a Google account to go ahead and do this. So if you don't have one, you're going to need to sign up for one. And once you do, once you're here on this link, you can hit this text right here in the top right-hand corner that says Go to Console. Now, once you're here, you're going to see all the projects you have with Firebase. Now, you can see this is the one I use for the demo, but we're going to create a new project here. So you can click on this box right here that says Add Project. Now, it's going to ask you for a name. So for this case, let's do U2 form just to keep it, relevant. And we're going to go ahead and continue. Now, you can name it anything you want. Like I said, that was just relevant to what we're doing here, so that's why I chose that. Now, you can see here for step 2, we have Google Analytics. Now, if this was something you're going to be shooting to production, this is something that you can go ahead and do. But for this project, we're going to not enable Google Analytics. And let's go ahead and create project, and it will take some time here. And once this is done provisioning, we'll be able to head to our Firebase dashboard and get started. Okay, so some time has passed, and as you can see, our project is now ready. So let's go ahead and hit continue here. And once we hit continue, like I said before, we're going to be taken to our Firebase dashboard. Now from here, we want to head over to, on the left-hand side, you'll see we have a tab, and we have one called Cloud FireStore. Now this is what we're going to be using to send our data from our modal to Firebase. So let's go ahead and create our database here by clicking on the icon or button right here. Now, we're prompted with 2 different modes. We have start in production mode and we have start in test mode. Now, once again, since this project is like a demo, we're going to be selecting the start in test mode. As you can see here, now anyone with your Firebase data reference will be able to view, edit, and delete all data in your database for 30 days. After that, you will not have access to it. So this is perfect for what we're doing. And by default, it'll pick the best location for your FireStore. And let's go ahead and hit enable there. And once again, this will take some time to provision, but once it is done, it will let us look at our actual Cloud FireStore database. Okay, so some more time has passed, and as you can see now, it is done provisioning, and we're here in our Cloud FireStore dashboard where we can go ahead and start a collection. So for now, we're going to leave this empty. We will be getting back to this later in the video, but what we need to go ahead and do now is link up our Firebase project with our HTML and our JavaScript files. So how we can do that is we can go back to the home project overview over here, and right here on the very top, depending on when you watch this video, if they do change it, right now it's on the very top. You can see get started by adding Firebase to your app, and we want to select the one that looks like a code icon. So we're going to go ahead and click that, and we need to go ahead and register our app. So once again, give your app a nickname. So we're going to do U2 form, not from. U2 form, and you can also go ahead and set up Firebase hosting if you wanted to. Now for this video, we're not going to go ahead and do that, but if you are going to be hosting it with Firebase, you're more than welcome to go ahead and set this up, but I will not be going over that in this video. So let's go ahead and register our app, and once it's done registering, we'll get a Firebase SDK, which is what we're going to be copying and pasting into our Firebase.js files. So as you can see right here, we have a script tag with your web app's Firebase configuration. So let's go ahead and copy the var Firebase config and the initialized Firebase code right here. So we're going to go ahead and copy that. We're going to head back over to our Firebase.js and simply go ahead and copy and paste that in. Now, for a future reference to our database, I'm going to go ahead and create something here, and I hope you guys do this as well. So we're going to do a const db, and we're going to do equals to Firebase.FireStore, which is a method. So now every time we want to access our database in the future, when we're doing this project, we can just simply use DB and get a reference to whatever we want to go ahead and do. So with that being said, we're not done just yet. So we need to get some script tags to implant here in our head section to actually connect to our Firebase app. And they give us the core one right here, but we're also going to need to do one specifically just for FireStore, and I'll show you how to do that here. So let's head back over to our file, and in the head section here, we're going to copy and paste a script tag in, which is what I got from right here. And like I said before, we need to go ahead and do one for specifically FireStore. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is copy and paste another one in here. And instead of Firebase.app or /app or -app, we're going to do Firebase FireStore.js. Now this will give us the ability to use this library of FireStore. So with that being said, I'm going to save that, copy it, because we need to implant this in both of our files since both HTML files will be using Firebase. And let's go ahead and do that. And with that being said, once we have those two items copied into our HTML files and our Firebase config right here, that is all we need to do to get started with integrating and working with Firebase and FireStore. So let's go ahead and get into actually sending our modal data to FireStore. Alright, so now that we went ahead and integrated Firebase and Cloud FireStore into our project, we can now begin setting up the methods to send our modal data, which is our phone number and our email, over to Cloud FireStore. So let's head back over to our app.js, which is where we're going to be doing all the code for sending our modal data to Firebase. And we need to do a few variables to begin here. So what I'm going to first do is create a variable with Firebase data. So what this is going to be referencing is the collection we want to go ahead and send our data on our modal to. So how we can do this is we can begin by using DB, which if you recall is this right here, this variable we created in our Firebase.js, which is referencing Firebase.FireStore. So simply what this is saying is Firebase.FireStore, and then we can use another method called collection, pass that a value of form data. Now where I'm getting form data from is the name I want to call the collection, but if you head over to our Cloud FireStore, you'll see we don't have a collection named form data. So do we need to create it? And that's the great thing about Firebase and FireStore is that if you reference a collection that doesn't exist, Firebase will go ahead and automatically create that for you. So we can just simply leave it at this. And what's going to happen is when we go ahead and send our data to form data, the collection, it's going to create it because it does not exist. Okay. Now, I do need to create a few more variables, so I'm going to go ahead and paste in here to save some time since these are simple ones. So what we have going on here is we have a variable of accept, which is targeting the class of accept, which is our button that we're going to be using to trigger the sending of our data. Then we have a variable here of only number, which is what we're going to be using to validate our phone number value to make sure that it is only a number and not any other characters. And then we have our two validation classes right here, which is our air email and our air phone number, which have the class of email air and then phone number air. Okay. So what I also want to do here in the start is, since we're going to be using this right here, again, the same exact code, I want to create a function to simplify it and not repeat ourselves. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a function of close modal, and we're going to simply copy and paste this in here. And then every time we want to cancel our modal, we're going to pass in the close modal function to save some code, because when we go ahead and set up our Firebase to send our data, we're going to need to use the same exact function again to close out the modal after we go ahead and hit the accept button. Okay. So right below the modal button, I want to go ahead and create an event, add an event listener to our accept button, because that's what we're going to be using to trigger the ability to send our data to Firebase. So every time we click this, we want to go ahead and send our data to Firebase, but we also want to provide a little bit of validation to make sure we're not sending empty data to Firebase. Okay. So let's go ahead and pass in a click function here. So every time we click this, we want to go ahead and run a function. We're going to pass it an anonymous arrow function here. Okay, so what we want to do is every time we click accept, we want to validate all of the input values. So we have two input values. We have our phone number and we also have our email. So for the email, we're going to pass, for the phone number, we're going to pass a if statement saying the phone number dot the value, and we want to get the length of this. So we're going to say the phone number value length, if that is less than or equal to 11, this can go ahead and run true, or it can continue on. And we also want to make sure that the phone number, the value, it matches, we can use the match method here, the only number. So what we're saying here is if the phone number dot value dot length is less than 11 characters and the phone number dot value matches to be only numbers and not any other characters, this can continue on through. Else, we want to run a code block to go ahead and simply add our error phone number text to appear if that is not correct. Okay, so what we can do here is we can target our error phone number right up here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this, and we want to say classlist.remove. And if you recall, we had a display none class on there, which was not letting it display by default. So if we head over here, you'll see that when we take this off, this one right here, it'll say please enter a valid number. Okay, so let's head back over to our app.js and do the same thing for our email. So we're going to pretty much pass it as a chain. So we're going to say if this one passes, continue on. But now we also want to validate our email. So we're going to say email, which is right here, which is our email value. And we're going to say if the value does not equal an empty string, you can go ahead and run the code. Now what will be inside here is the code to go ahead and send our data to Firebase, because at this point all the values are valid and we want to go ahead and send that data over to Firebase. Now else we want to go ahead and do the same thing we did here. So we're going to grab the error email and we're going to say class list, and we're going to remove display none. Oops, we got to put a dash in there. Okay, so that is working in the event that if this is true and this is true, we'll go ahead and perform the code to go ahead and send our form data to Firebase. If not, we'll go ahead and show us some errors. Now, we also have to think that if someone goes ahead and corrects that error, we need to go ahead and put that display none back on. So if this value is true, we want to simply say error phone number dot class list dot add display none, and the same thing over here. So if this is true, we want to do the same thing for our error email. Okay, so that is all the validation we need to go ahead and do. So let's head over to our modal and actually test this out to see how it's working. So let me just refresh it here. Now, if we type in a blank number and I hit add your info, it's not going to let anything happen. It's actually going to pop up, please enter a valid number. So let's go ahead and enter a valid number. And if we do that, if we hit add your info again, now that validation is removed because we provided a valid number. Hypothetically, this isn't a valid number, it probably is. But now our email is blank, so we need to go ahead and provide a valid email. So let's do my personal one here. So now if I hit add your info, that disappears, and now all the data is valid. So hypothetically, at this point, we'll need to send this data right here to Firebase. So let's go ahead and do that. So where we're going to do that is right in this if statement right here. So if it's true, we need to reference firebase.data. Now we want to provide a method called doc, which is going to create a new document in this collection. And then we want to go ahead and set this data in another method and give it an object. Okay. Now inside this object, we want to have two values. We want to have a number, and we're going to set the equal to phone number dot value. Okay. And then we also want to do an email value or email property. And what's going on here? And we're going to provide that the email dot value. And that's pretty much it. So this code right here will go ahead and send our data over to Firebase. Now we also want to perform a then method on here because this will return a promise, And once it is complete, it'll go ahead and run this then method. And we're going to provide this an arrow function and say we want to then close out the modal. Okay. So now if I go ahead and head over to our modal and we enter some data, we'll just do this number right here and provide a valid email, and we hit add your info, you'll see that it finished loading post over to Firebase and the modal closed like it should. And if I head over to Firebase, our Cloud FireStore, and refresh, you'll see that we now have the collection of form data. There is a new document, and inside that document are the values that we just provided our modal. So we have now set up our modal to go ahead and send our data to Cloud FireStore. Okay, so now that we can send our data to Cloud FireStore, we want to now retrieve that data and then implement it here right on this form or this personal data's entry page we have, which is currently empty. So let's go ahead and fix that, okay? So to start, we want to go ahead and get a reference to our collection in our form data.js. So what I'm going to do is db again and pass in the method collection. Inside that collection, we're going to be using form data, which is housing all the information right here. So what we want to do is tack on a get method here. So we want to go ahead and get this data, and that's going to return a promise. So we want to go ahead and say, then once it's got the data, we want to do something with that data. So we're going to pass in a parameter here of res for the response, followed by an arrow function. And what I do wrong? Oh, I did that wrong. Okay, there we go. Okay, so right now we're saying get this data from the collection form data, and once it's done, we want to do something. So to begin here, let's go ahead and console.log the result here. So I'm going to console.log res. Now if I head over to our form data page, you'll see we have this response right here. Now in this response, it's going to be a lot of stuff we don't necessarily need, but we are going to be needing this docs right here. So you can see here that docs is another array with some more data. So to go ahead and get this data right here, we're going to have to do a few things. So since it could be more than one item, as you can see, it is an array, we're going to have to loop through the results. So we can do res.for each, and let's see, we'll just type it out here, for each. And we want to pass another parameter, so we're going to call this doc for each document. So we're going to do another arrow function here. And if we just console.log the doc, you'll see now we will get another response here. Still doesn't look quite what we want, but if we go ahead and tack on the data method here, so if I do console.log doc.data, you'll see now I actually get the information from our FireStore collection. You can see we have the number and my email. So if I go over to our modal pop-up and I add another one, so let's just do some numbers in here and do testing 123 at yahoo.com. If I add this info, you'll see now if I come over to form entries and I refresh, we're now going to get the other response that we just went ahead and added, which is right here. So pretty cool. Now we need to go ahead and have a way for this data to get implemented here on the page. So let's go ahead and set up a function to go ahead and take this data and then dynamically import it to the page each time a new request is created. Well, we're going to go ahead and do the real time at the very end of the video, but for now we're going to be using this simple get request right here to go ahead and retrieve the data and then dynamically insert it here on the page. Okay, so now that we are retrieving our data from Cloud FireStore, we want to go ahead and actually inject this data here using HTML onto our page. So let's head back over to our form data.js and get started. So to begin, I want to create a variable called form data. Now this is going to be referring to the container we're going to want to append all of our HTML using JavaScript in when we get to that point. So we're going to be requesting, or we're going to be referencing this class right here, form-data. So let's head back over here and finish this up. So document.query selector, and we're going to go ahead and pass in the class of form data. Okay, so we have a couple ways we can go ahead and actually create our HTML for our data. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is we're going to use a function for our HTML. And we're going to put it all inside a function. And each time there is a new response from our database, we're going to go ahead and call that function to create that data and then implement that into our page. So we're going to call this function create form data. Now we haven't created this function just yet, but we're going to. So we're going to go ahead and call this create form data and pass it the actual whole doc so that inside of that function we can reference it to go ahead and actually add our values to our HTML. So if I save that right now, you'll go ahead and see here that it's not going to exist because it's not defined, but let's go ahead and fix that. So what we want to do here is create this function. So function, we're going to call this create form data. And we're going to pass it the parameter of doc, which is what we're giving it right here. We can name this anything you want, but just to keep it consistent, I'm going to go ahead and name it doc. And then let's go ahead and do our open brackets here and get started. So we need to create some HTML elements. So we're going to go ahead and call this first variable a div because we're going to create a new div for each document. Okay, so we're going to do let div equal document dot create element. And we're going to go ahead and pass this a value of div. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and create another variable here. We're going to create two more and call this number. And we're going to go ahead and do the same thing, document.create element. And we're going to call these, or we're going to create spans for our number and our email. Okay. Let's go ahead and copy and paste that in here. So now that we have, let's go ahead and name this email. Now that we have references to all the items we want to create, we now need to go ahead and set the value from our Cloud FireStore database to these individual elements, okay? Now, before we do that, I want to go ahead and add a class to our div of form info. Now, where I'm getting this from is in our style sheet. I went ahead and created a class for the divs already, of form info, and you can see here we have it as position relative. Padding of 20 and 25, and just some other properties, border bottom, display, some gap, cursor and a transition, and also a hover property on here as well. Okay, but not going to get too much into the CSS of this. Now, we want to go ahead and actually dynamically set the values of our number and our email using this doc parameter. So how we can do that is we can first, let's go ahead and get the number. So we're going to do number.textContent. And we're going to set this equal to doc. Now we can go ahead and get the data from this doc by using the doc.data method. And then we want to go ahead and pass it the doc data of number. Now where I'm getting this from is if we head over to Cloud FireStore, you'll see that these fields have an email value and a number. So this is where I'm getting that from. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for our email property. So we're going to do email.textContent, set that equal to doc.data. Email. Okay. Now that we have these two set to the values, we want to go ahead and append these items to our div. So we can do div.append child and do number. And same thing for our email. So append child and do our email. Now, last but not least, we want to go ahead and actually append the whole entire div to our form data. So we can do form data.append child and then append the whole entire div. And that's going to be it. Now, if we head over to our form data.html, you should see that we now have our values from Cloud FireStore here. So next, what I want to go ahead and do is actually go ahead and add the ability to delete these entries from our HTML sheet here. So let's go ahead and get into that. Okay, so to add this delete button right here, we're going to be using Font Awesome. Now, this is the finished product right here. So right now we are left with this. So we want to go ahead and add this delete button to our project. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So to add that, we're going to go back to our function here where we create our form data, and we're going to go ahead and create another element. We're going to call this icon, and we're going to simply do the same thing we did before and do document.create create element, and we're going to go ahead and create a span. Now, with this span, we're going to want to go ahead and simply add the class from our Font Awesome library. Now, I'm going to go ahead and actually do this. Let's see. Where do I want to go ahead and do this? We'll do it right. We'll do it right here. So let's do icon.class list. And we want to go ahead and add the class list of, we're going to do two of them here. We're going to do FAR, which is from the Font Awesome library. We're going to do a comma, and then we want to do dash trash dash alt. Okay, now we need to go ahead and do the same thing we did for our number and our email and actually append this to our div. So we're going to do append child here, pass in the icon, and now if we head over to our entry here, we should now see we have our delete button here. But if we go ahead and click it, it's not going to do anything. If I refresh it, it's still there. So let's go ahead and address that as well. So what we can do is we can actually set up an add event listener in our function here to go ahead and listen for a click on that actual delete icon and then go ahead and simply delete it. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that right below our form data. We're going to go ahead and just put this as delete, and we're going to go ahead and do an icon dot add event listener here, and we're going to pass in the value of a click, and then when we click we want to run a function, so we'll do an arrow function here. And when this runs, we want to go ahead and get a reference to that icon we're going to be clicking, and we need to go ahead and somehow associate what entry we want to go ahead and delete. So if we go back to our Cloud FireStore, each of our document has a unique ID, and how we can get that ID is through our whole document right here, the parameter we're passing through our create form data. So what we can do is we can create a variable here called ref for a reference, and we're going to go ahead and say db.collection, and we're going to look for form data from Firebase, and we want to go ahead and get the doc that references the current doc that we're in. So we can say doc.id, which will give us this ID right here. So when we click on this, we want to go ahead and do a method called delete. So if I go ref.delete and I save this, now if I head back over to our form entries and I delete one of these, you can see we had a little thing run here in our console. If I refresh it, that entry is now gone. So next and finally what I want to go and set up is our real-time listener, so that when we add items from our modal pop-up here, so for example if I go ahead and add a few numbers in here and we just do another email of testing at yahoo.com. I did a couple there. It was a really bad email. As you can see here, nothing happens. We have to go ahead and refresh it. What I want to do with the real-time listener is when we add that data, we will not have to refresh. And the same thing when we delete an item, we won't even have to refresh it. It'll just automatically delete and we won't have to do any refreshing. So let's go ahead and start to set up our real-time listener in the next section. Okay, so currently right now we are getting our information from FireStore using this get method from our db collection.form data. So when we use our real-time listener, we're actually not going to be needing this anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and comment that out, and above it or below it, however you want to go ahead and consider that, we're going to do a new method. So we're going to also be referencing the collection of form data like we were before, but instead of doing a get method, we're going to use a method that we have from Firebase called onSnapshot. So what this is going to do is each time there is a new update to the snapshot, this right here will run. So inside of this, we're going to go ahead and pass it a parameter called snap, and we want to go ahead and do an anonymous arrow function here. And we want to go ahead and say snap, and then another method called doc changes, which is another method, and we want to say for each, because this is going to hypothetically return the same thing we had down here, is going to return an array of items. So we need to use a for each method to go ahead and loop through these. So like we did before, I'm going to go ahead and pass this a parameter of doc and then another function right here. And here is where we're going to go ahead and do the same kind of code we did in our get method. But let me show you what we get when we actually console log the result from this right here. So it's a little bit different, and we're going to be setting up a few things to make this real-time listener work correctly. So if I console log here, we'll do doc.type. We'll just reference a doc for right now, okay? And then if I head over here, you'll see we get 2 responses for each of our documents that we have in FireStore. Now, if you see, this looks a little bit different from our previous call when we were doing the get method. So you can see the main thing we have right here is a type of added. So we're going to be referencing this type to do a few things, such as actually create our form data, and when we remove an item, it will come back with a type of removed, and we're also going to be doing something with that as well when we go ahead and remove data, so we can actually do it in real time. So if we head back over to our function here, one thing I want to do before I get started here with anything else is actually go ahead and set an attribute of something, or of our doc, or sorry, I want to go ahead and set a attribute on our div for the current document ID. So we're going to be using that to reference something when we go ahead and remove. So I want to go ahead and set this now. So how we can do this is do a div.set attribute, and we can go ahead and set the attribute name. We're going to go ahead and name this data.id, and we're going to go ahead and do a comma, and we want to say doc.id, because that's going to go ahead and give us the ID as the same way we did down here. Okay, so if I save that, we'll now have a reference to our document ID on our div once we go ahead and create this. So let's go ahead and remove this console.log. So we want to say if the doc.type is equal to added, we want to then run our code for creating our form data. So we can do create form data, and we want to go ahead and pass this the doc. Okay, and let's go ahead and save that. Now if we head over to our page, you can see that doc.data is not a function. Now the problem when we use this on snapshot method is there's actually an additional doc we have to go ahead and pass. So if I do this, you'll see that we now have our data. So when this data returns, there's another layer to go ahead and get to our data. So we have to pass a doc.doc again to go ahead and get the same result. Otherwise we're going to run into that error. So now if I head over to our modal pop-up, let's go ahead and actually split the screen if I can correctly here. Let me see, how do I want to do this? Let's just do this right here. There we go. That's not what I wanted, but let me see here. Let's go ahead and minimize that out, and let's just do this, and let's do that. Okay, so now if I open up our modal here and we type in a number, and we do an email, let's just do john@testing.com, and if I hit add your info, you should see now without refreshing, our data will appear right here on our modal. But now if we click delete, nothing happens. But let me show you what happens when I run that delete method on our console here. You'll see, let me do another one. I don't think it's actually going to show. So yeah, we're not console logging the type anymore. Let me go ahead and add that back in. So if I go over here and we do console.log, and we do doc.type as the console, you'll see that right when we add our form data, it becomes added, but if I hit delete, it becomes a doc type of remove. So what we want to do in our function here is if the type is removed, we need to create some sort of way to actually remove that data, and that's where this reference to our div and the doc ID we pass is going to come in handy. So we're going to say else if this doc.type equals removed, then we want to run this code. And what we're going to do here is we want to get a reference to that div, and how we can do that is by creating a variable. We're going to say let div equal document.query selector, and we want to say inside of this, we're going to go ahead and pass some template literals here, and we're going to do we're going to do data ID, which is what we gave it right up here, equals, and do some interpolation here, and we're going to say doc.doc.id. Okay, so this right here will give us a reference to the current div that we're passing by using the doc.doc.id. So if we go ahead and put a semicolon here and we do form data dot remove child, because the current one that is removed, we want to go ahead and get a reference to it, and we want to remove it. So we'll say form data dot remove the child of div. Okay, so this code right here will get us a real-time reference to remove that document and not have to make us refresh. So if I come over here, currently right now we have nothing in our modal because we deleted everything. So let's go ahead and add a new one. Okay, so if I hit add info, you'll see that it'll happen in real time. But now if I delete this, you'll see that it is also removed in real time. So that is going to be it. We went ahead and created a modal to send our form data to FireStore and then retrieve it back using FireStore as well, using a real-time listener. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you guys did, be sure to leave a like down below, and I will see you guys in the next one.